What's up, YouTube? This is Pluto Vision here, back with another video. In this video, I'll be discussing having Pluto in the third house of your natal chart. So Pluto in your birth chart represents the area of your life where you go through the deepest and most drastic transformations and changes. It represents rebirth, which is the beginning of a new cycle. It represents death, which is the end of an old cycle. It's also the area of your life where you hold the most power, and also where you get into the most power struggles with other individuals as well as yourself. It is an area where we share intimate truths with other people. And it's also an area of life where we tend to have x-ray vision, meaning it's where you can see beneath the surface much deeper than the average person. And it's also typically an area where you tend to be very obsessive, or have a very high level of expertise in that specific area of your life, right? Now, the third house represents your mind, specifically like the prefrontal cortex, logical thinking, learning, teaching. It also represents education from like an elementary to high school type of environment. And if you also want to apply that to adult life, think of it as, you learning the basics of a topic. Like, for example, let's say astrology. The third house would be when you're just learning all the facts and the basics about astrology and all the specifics. It's also rules your local environment, anything within between 15 to 30 miles of where you live, like your local community. It represents your siblings, and it also represents journalism, news reporting, coding, or anything regarding the design, or the design of apps and websites. That's also the third house as well. And it also rules transportation on a local sense, like taking the train or a bus or driving your car or even a bike. Those are third house themes. So yeah, Pluto in the third house, you naturally have a very deep and investigative mind. You're the type of person where if you receive any type of information, you're able to quickly discern between whether or not this is real and factual information or fake information. So you're not the type of person to get, duped by fake news, for example. If you receive information, you're going to go beneath the surface and do all the research to figure out whether or not this is true or not. And if you put that skill to use, you can be you can be someone that holds a very high capacity for learning as well as teaching and regurgitating the information that you're learning to other people. You're someone that can easily master any subject, as long as you actually put forth the effort to do so, right? You tend to have obsessive tendencies regarding anything that you're interested in. So you're the type of person where you get locked in and honed in on something. You're going to spend all of your time thinking about that specific topic and learning everything that you can learn about that topic in order to master it, so that you can then use that knowledge to your own advantage, as well as helping others with that same knowledge, right? So because of this, you will make a very good journalist. If someone gives you a topic to report on, you're going to get out in the field and actually not only read about this knowledge, not only read the facts about it, but you're also going to get out into the local community and into the local environment and see what type of, evidence or facts you can uncover that you can use for, whatever you're reporting on. Even if it's not journalism in the sense of like being a news reporter, this same thing can apply to anything in life. You can do your own experiments and your own, your own journalism, or your own, just anything of that nature about whatever topic that you're trying to, master. The same thing can apply to work, for example. Someone gives you a task, someone gives you something to focus on, and you're going to go and gather anything you can to be an expert in that specific area of your life, right? Now, people with Pluto in the third house might have grown up in a pretty dark environment. And it's not necessarily that the environment was dark. You just might likely were exposed to things in your local environment or people, or, just certain energies in your local environment that were not necessarily things that the average person knows is going on. So you might know all the dark secrets about the people, that you grew up with or the people that live around you. That's an example of something that a Pluto in the third house person could have, experienced growing up, right? If you have Pluto in the third house, you also probably have a very deep and intimate relationship with your siblings, right? Or it could go the other way and it could have been a pretty abusive relationship that you had with your siblings or even your neighbors. There could have been some pretty dark things going on within your neighborhood, or like I said, you guys could be your neighbors could be very close with you. It could go either ways with Pluto being there. Because Pluto goes deep. There's never going to be anything surface level wherever you have Pluto, right? Now, because Pluto is never surface level, you might struggle with OCD or obsessive thoughts if you have Pluto in the third house. Now, this can be used to your advantage, like I stated, because this is not necessarily a negative. It's just a misuse or a misguidance. Your energy is being misused. You know, it's imperative that you give your mind something to focus on that's actually productive. Because if you allow your mind to go down the wrong rabbit holes, you can put yourself in a pretty bad position. You can think your way into depression, or you can think your way into having even suicidal thoughts. But if you instead direct that energy and those thoughts towards productive means, you can master any subject and live a life of fulfillment, as long as it's in alignment with what your life path is, you know. Um, so if you have Pluto in the third house, you need to give your mind something to focus on that's actually going to bring you good results. You don't want to go down the path of anything destructive. You also need to stay away from people in your local environment that can bring anything destructive into your life, because again, you naturally see the good and the bad. You naturally see the things that are hidden within, your local environment. And you don't want to get caught up in bad situations just because you have access to them. Instead, you want to use that same energy to seek out individuals who may be hidden from, society, but they're actually very useful. They might be actually very wise individuals that are kind of in the underworld, not necessarily the underworld in the bad sense, but they're kind of just, hidden in plain sight. Um, if you have Pluto in the third house, like I said, just going back to the what I stated about siblings, um, it's imperative that if you did have any type of difficult relationship with your siblings, that you go through some type of therapy or anything that you can to heal from that trauma, because it could bleed into your adult life. Right now, with Pluto also ruling the third house, which is early education, you could have had a pretty difficult, a difficult time in school. Wherever Pluto is, you tend to be ostracized because the energy of Pluto can be very penetrative and it can make people feel uncomfortable. So you might have been the person that was getting bullied in school, or you were an outcast in school, and that could have left a lasting impression on you. Right. On the flip side, because you have Pluto in the third house, you could have also been someone that was very magnetic, that was able to draw in the attention and support of all of your peers growing up as well. Either way, you know, either of those experiences can also still be utilized very positively as an adult, because if you were the one that was ostracized growing up, because you went through those difficult times, you now know how to be authentic without needing the approval of other people, because you've already been an outcast. On the flip side, if you were the person that had all the attention, you had all the power growing up, you can then use that same energy to maintain that as an adult and be able to be an influential person over your local community. Either way, you still hold that power. Whether you went through difficult times or good times growing up, you still hold that power. You're just kind of using it in a different way, right? You may have been a very good student if you have Pluto in the third house, because like I said, you catch on to things, you learn very quickly, and you can easily master any subject due to the fact you have a very obsessive nature about anything. You're gonna see through all of the fluff and all the surface level stuff and get to the bottom of things and master it. So you are likely a very good student. And even if you weren't a good student, maybe if you didn't get the greatest grades, you were still always very good intellectually at anything that you put your mind and focus to. So it's imperative again that you take that same skill set and that same energy and apply it to whatever it is you're doing now as an adult, right? Um, Hulu in the third house, you also more than likely very good when it comes to any type of mechanic skills or anything related to anything that you're doing with your hands, because the third house does rule the hands. So you're probably likely very good with your hands, and even if you don't know you're good with your hands, you will likely pick up on the skill very quickly. So being a mechanic or any type of like physical labor, you would do very well at sports as well. Like basketball, baseball, anything that requires high levels of hand-eye coordination. Third house also rules the lungs, so you likely have a very high lung capacity, but it's going to take work for you to do so because if you haven't used it, Pluto goes to the extreme. So you could be very out of shape, have a hard time breathing, maybe even have asthma. But if you put in the work, you could be top tier when it comes to, anything regarding like, the lungs. So anything regarding stamina, anything involving stamina, like running or playing sports, you will be very well at. Um, the third house also rules the voice and speech. So you like to have a very commanding voice, a very commanding presence. You can draw people in with your voice and through your speech. However, again, this requires you to have full confidence in that skill because, again, like I just stated, Pluto goes to the extreme. So you can either be very poor at it because you lack confidence, or you can be great at it if you put in the work. A perfect example of someone who had Pluto in the third house is Martin Luther King. And we all know the influence that he had. Regardless of your opinion on him, he had a very large influence. And a lot of it had to do with his voice, his ability to draw people in through his speeches. Decades later, we're still listening to and studying his speeches. You know, um, if you have Pluto in the third house, um, be wary of, public or local transportation. Um, be wary of reckless driving, road raging, and things of that nature because Pluto can be destructive. So you might have a tendency to possibly get yourself into accidents, driving on the road. You know what I mean? Or people trying to provoke you while you're driving. Or if you're on public transportation, you might you might be the kind of person that for whatever reason you're always the one that attracts homeless people or crazy people trying to mess with you. So just be aware of that. Be aware of your surroundings and learn how to control your temper when it comes to these type of environments. Um, Last but not least, you will likely be a very good programmer or coding or just anything regarding computer science or the design of apps, the design of websites, um, publishing information, anything tech related that is more so working behind the scenes, the design of the app, the design of the website, or being the one to write the article and come up with all the facts. You'd be very good at that. You like to have a very prosperous career in that area of life. Um, so that pretty much concludes this video. If you have any questions or requests, drop them in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And